Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. We have an exciting panel that we're going to begin this afternoon on persecution against Christian communities. My name is Travis Weber, and I'm director of the Center for Religious Liberty at the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., where we advocate on religious freedom issues both in the United States and around the world. I want to thank the organizers of this conference, the Presbyterian Church of Taiwan's Bible College campus here, which is hosting us, Bob Fu, and the other organizers and co-hosts. Bob, thank you for inviting me here. This is a very important event, a critical event at this time, and it's a critical event indeed at other times too. Before I get into our panel this afternoon, I'm going to just give a brief overview of the panelists, a brief word about what they're going to present on, give a few introductory remarks myself, and then we will proceed from one panelist to the other for the course of about an hour and a half, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. After my introductory remarks, we're going to hear first from Benedict Rogers. He's going to cover religious freedom in East and South Asia, among other titles and many items on his resume. He's an experienced religious freedom advocate and works with Christian Solidarity worldwide. So we'll hear from him first. Following him, we're going to hear from Siju Thomas. He works with ADF India on interventions, advocating for Christians and others on religious freedom issues in India. He's going to cover South Asia and India. Then we're going to hear from James Chen. He's Vice President of Global Operations with Institute for Global Engagement. James has a history as an Asia expert, and he has experience here in Taiwan. So he's going to cover issues related to that, and we're going to hear from him, though, specifically today on the Middle East during our panel on Christian communities. Stephen Inada, unfortunately, cannot be with us today. In his place, however, Dr. Shayu Ajibuye is going to be giving us remarks on the situation of religious freedom in Africa. We're very pleased to have him with us. He's the president of Mission Africa International, president of Redeemed Christian Church of God Seminary near Dallas, Texas. So very glad to have him filling in for Stephen today. Next on our panel, Professor Massimo Intravigne. He's the managing director, founder of the Center for Studies on New Religions in Torino, Italy, and most well known perhaps as the editor of the magazine on religious freedom in China, Bitter Winter. Among other items, he's been an author of more than 70 books, so he's going to cover the issue of China for us today. Last on our panel, Reverend Dr. Lim Chong-Hwa is going to cover religious freedom here in Taiwan. So we're pleased to have a lineup of a number of panelists here today. And to start our panel, I'm just going to offer a few introductory remarks on religious freedom and persecution against Christian communities. In a recent study, the Pew Research Center found that Christians were targeted for religious persecution in 144 countries, making them a persecuted group in almost 3/4 of the world's nation states. The participants of this conference know very well this reality of religious persecution, for many of these religious freedom violators are here in East, South, and Southeast Asia, whether North Korea, Vietnam, Pakistan, Nepal, India, Burma, Malaysia, Indonesia, or the 500-pound religious freedom violator in this room today, China. Well, what is to be done about this? I would submit, as someone who works on religious freedom issues in Washington, D.C., working for a Christian organization representing Christians across the United States, that what we need is a reawakening on international religious freedom in the American church. We need not only a reawakening on the surface level, but we need a theology of religious freedom, a theology that is taught in Christian communities across America, pervades our communities and our churches. This issue must be on the hearts and minds of America's Christians if we're going to see serious, sustained change. This theology of religious freedom must be promoted and taught and widespread, not because we're trying to manipulate anyone, but because our faith demands it. It is the only thing that will lead to sustained action in the long term. And if we don't speak up for fellow believers while we still have the freedom to do so, who will? Why do I say this? Religious freedom, we have to remember, is not just an American right, it's a human right. All people, including the world's Christian communities, must be protected in the exercise of this right. This is just as apparent today as it was during the post-World War II era, out of which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Article 18 were born. Article 18, as we know, protects religious freedom robustly, protects proper understanding of religious freedom, including the freedom to choose, change one's belief, and live it out. Indeed, in our increasingly interconnected world, we are quite aware that we are meeting today in a context which is hostile to religious liberty across the board. This is obvious not only from the worsening trend in China, but from other places that this issue does not solve itself. So in my work at Family Research Council, we're trying to engage America's Christians on this issue. Like we work on religious freedom in the United States, we want to work on it around the world. We welcome anyone who wants to join us in this effort. While American Christians rightly believe that God is in control, we also have a choice to make. When we see fellow human beings suffering, how can we not speak up and say something? This very fact leads us to advocate also for people of other faiths, for we recognize all human beings are created in the image of God. The Christian understands that God does not force us to believe him. God does not force us to follow him. Neither should we use the power of government to force people to do so either. Put in context, this means that Christians should also advocate, in addition to for fellow believers in places like China, for Uyghurs who are being persecuted in China and elsewhere. I met just last week with a Uyghur individual in the United States who was facing a situation in which his family member has been put in a camp in China. It broke my heart, and it reminded me how much people need to hear these stories, how much they need to put a face to the issue sometimes in order to be connected to the issue, to really advocate on it, properly put their faith into action. These matters of conscience hit a sensitive spot for a reason. Conscience is unique to us as human beings. It marks us as human. The very fact that we are offended by such violations of conscience is testament to the importance of it and the need to protect it. So, turning to specifics, looking at China. As the United States and China continue to discuss trade talks, religious freedom must be on the table. We're doing everything that we can to ensure that religious freedom is part of the discussion as the United States engages with governments around the world, including China. We cannot afford to let this opportunity pass. China must be called upon to protect religious freedom and human rights for all people. China's eyes the persecution of Uyghurs and Christians, among other groups, is connected. It views the religious beliefs of these people not as something to be allowed, protected as an obligation to God that all human beings called upon to fulfill, but as a threat to the political ideology of the state and the authority of the party. Last week, a Wall Street Journal article revealed that several Western companies receive raw materials from factories where Uyghurs are being forced to work. The same area where over 1 million are in camps and detained by the Chinese government. Big business is not lacking for options on ethical and moral issues. They're not lacking for opinions on these issues elsewhere in other areas. Why are they so silent when it comes to China's religious freedom abuses or religious freedom problems around the world? The answer could be that it's being driven by the bottom line. As long as the bottom lines advance, it pays to stay silent. Big business, though, like big government, must be called to account for knowingly profiting off religious freedom violations. China's view that it is permissible for the state to control religion is the exact opposite of the understanding of religious freedom, which is at the core of the American experiment. It holds that a human being's obligation to God is most sacred, must be protected by civil government, not controlled or interfered with. The very fact that this obligation is to God above civil government makes it unique and makes it a matter of conscience. So this conscience-based understanding of religious freedom is what we're going to discuss today, and we focus on Christian communities. It's what's reflected in Article 18 of the UDHR, and it's the right that we're called upon to protect today. So with that, let me turn to Ben Rogers for our first presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a really great pleasure and privilege to be here today at this really important forum. And I want to reiterate, first of all, what has already been said several times during the day, which is that Taiwan is truly a beacon for democracy, for human rights, and particularly for religious freedom in this region. Taiwan is a beacon for everyone, but it's a beacon that I feel particularly personally because it's one of a rapidly dwindling number of places in this region that still allows me to enter. I had the dubious distinction of being denied entry on the orders of Beijing to Hong Kong in October 2017. I've also been deported from Myanmar or Burma, not once, but twice. I try not to make a habit of it, but that's what's happened. So I'm really glad to be welcomed in Taiwan and to be free. It also seems to me particularly appropriate to be speaking today on the theme of rising to the challenge, on what those of us who are Christians will be celebrating as Ascension Day. Rising to the challenge seems a particularly appropriate title on Ascension Day. We have the first slot after lunch, which is always a challenging time to speak in, even more so because I woke up particularly early today with jet lag, so we may have the unusual situation where the speaker falls asleep before the audience. But in order to prevent that happening, I decided to liven things up by having some images to go with what I say, because I think pictures speak louder than words. And so, just by way of introduction, I work, as has been said, for Christian Solidarity Worldwide, CSW. We're in our 40th year this year. And this image, I think, sums up rather amusingly but also profoundly what we're about. These badges we had made for our 40th anniversary saying, "Defending prayer and other subversive acts since 1979. In CSW, we work very much for freedom of religion or belief for everyone, no exceptions. We're a Christian organization. We work for persecuted Christians, but we also work for the Rohingyas in Burma or Myanmar, for the Uyghurs in China, and for people of all faiths and none. And Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which has been referred to several times today, is stenciled onto the wall of our office, a daily reminder of why we do what we do. So I'm going to give a pretty rapid tour of some of the countries that I work on, through images and through a few examples and stories. I'm going to focus more on other countries because China, I know quite rightly, will get a big focus over the coming days. But I can't not at least mention China in passing. China, as many of us, if not all of us, will know, is facing what I think everyone describes as the most severe crackdown on religious freedom and on religion, not just Christianity, since the Cultural Revolution. We will hear later, of course, more about the situation in Xinjiang facing the Uyghurs. But I think for Christianity, it is the worst time since the Cultural Revolution as well. And this image, the cover story of an article that I wrote for the Catholic Herald a few months ago, vividly depicts, I think, what is happening to Christians in China. And of course, it's important to remind ourselves that in just a few days' time, next week, we will remember the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen massacre. But I'm going to turn first to the world's most repressive, most closed nation. And there are a lot of competitors for that title. And China is certainly a strong contender. But I think it's fair to say that the most closed, most repressive nation in the world, North Korea, is a nation illustrated in this satellite image of the Korean peninsula, where the north is in total darkness, in contrast to the south, which is lit up brightly, of course illustrative of the economic difference between north and south, the political difference between north and south, but I think also the spiritual difference as well. In North Korea, there is no religious freedom at all. Many of the places we'll talk about, it is possible for people of faith to go to places of worship. They may face restrictions, they may face some discrimination. But in North Korea, even to identify yourself as a Christian is to invite a death sentence. If you are not executed, which many are, for possessing a Bible or for being suspected of having Christian faith, you are severely tortured in prison camps where there are more than 200,000 people in the prison camps, and an unknown number of whom are Christians. As I say, people are executed for possessing a Bible. North Korea has a policy of punishment up to 3 generations for political misdemeanors. So if your grandfather commits a crime against the Kim dynasty, which incidentally I think is the only regime in the world that is both a dynasty and that wants its people to treat it as a deity, and doesn't tolerate any belief that wavers from absolute loyalty to the Kim family. If your grandfather commits a political misdemeanor, your mother and you face the consequences as well. The United Nations held a commission of inquiry a few years ago, brilliantly chaired by the Australian judge Michael Kirby, which concluded that there is almost complete denial of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And indeed, the commission of inquiry concluded that North Korea is committing crimes against humanity. We published a report last year which examined some of the changes that have taken place in North Korea. And there have been some changes, not because of the regime, despite the regime, as a result of radio broadcasts and other factors. But the one thing that we found from all our interviews that has definitely not changed is religious freedom. One interviewee told us that a person found to be a Christian is very likely to be immediately shot. Another person told us that North Korean people just shudder when they even think about Christianity because the punishment is so severe. So that's a snapshot of the world's most closed nation. Let me turn now to the world's largest Muslim majority nation, Indonesia, and the world's largest archipelago, the world's 3rd largest democracy. A country that has just concluded probably the world's largest and certainly most complex set of elections. And I was in Indonesia during those elections for 3 weeks last month, and we just published our new report on the situation in Indonesia yesterday. Indonesia is a country that is truly at a crossroads. It's a country that has traditionally had a good tradition of religious pluralism, a country that is the world's largest Muslim majority nation, but is not an Islamic state. It is a pluralistic state constitutionally. And yet, the forces of religious intolerance in Indonesia have been steadily rising over recent years. I met, on election day, I visited polling stations, and I sat down with a man who was a member of a group called the Islamic Defenders Front, an extremist group that is responsible for the forcible closure of many churches, Ahmadiyya mosques, and other minority places of worship. And I asked him what his organization's vision was for Indonesia, and he said, our vision is that Islamic teachings should be imposed in full upon all Indonesians, whether they're Muslim or not, and that anyone who disobeys Islamic teachings should be punished. I asked him why his organization was supporting the contender for the presidency, Prabowo Subianto, a former general. And he said because Prabowo has promised to fulfill our vision. Now, thankfully, Prabowo did not win the elections, although the situation is still turbulent because he's challenging the results and there have been riots on the streets, although it's clear that he lost. But Indonesia faces challenges on all fronts. The blasphemy laws, which led to the imprisonment of the governor of the capital city, Jakarta, a Christian known as Ahok, on false charges of blasphemy. The closure of a large number of churches throughout the country, churches that have been legally registered and in existence for many years. Violent attacks on churches. This is a church that a couple of years ago, on a Sunday morning, a man came in during the Sunday service and just before the gospel was being read, detonated a bomb. Mercifully, the bomb failed to explode, and he only succeeded in setting fire to his own hair, whereupon he unleashed a sword and a machete and attacked the priest at the altar. Again, mercifully, he was restrained, and no serious injuries were carried out, were felt, but of course it was a traumatic situation. This is another church which faced a far more serious situation. In Surabaya last year, it was one of 3 churches that was within minutes of each other attacked by a family of suicide bombers. The 2 teenage sons attacked this church. The mother and her 2 little daughters with explosives strapped to them attacked a second church, and then the father drove his car into this 3rd church. But although the focus of our session today is particularly on the persecution of Christians, it's important, I think, as has been said several times today, that we stand for freedom of religion for everyone. And that means remembering people like Meliana, a Buddhist woman who was charged under the blasphemy laws simply for asking if the loudspeakers on the nearby mosque, if the volume could be turned down slightly because her child was sick, and hardliners then pressed blasphemy charges against her. Or the Ahmadiyya community, who have been attacked violently over the years. Or this young man who was imprisoned not because of his religious belief, but because he does not have a religious belief. He is an atheist. I went to visit him in jail twice and campaign for him. The first time I went to see him, I said that I was from Christian Solidarity Worldwide, and he looked slightly surprised and said, "Don't you know I'm an atheist?" And I said, "Well, of course I do." But I said, "You and I have different beliefs, but nobody should be imprisoned for their beliefs, and I want to do what I can to help you." There are, however, some signs of hope in Indonesia, and I think it's these signs of hope that we need to encourage. There are leaders of different faith communities throughout the country who are working to try to counter intolerance and promote religious freedom. This is a Sunni Shia think tank that has been established, a remarkable organization. This is a group of people gathered by a Catholic priest in a suburb of Jakarta working to promote interfaith. So let me turn finally to the nation of Burma, Myanmar. We've already heard from my good friend Naeem earlier on today. Just last week, we published a new report called Burma's Identity Crisis: How Ethno-Religious Nationalism Has Led to Religious Intolerance, Crimes Against Humanity, and Genocide. We launched it in the British Parliament last week. And in our report, which you can find on our website, we document many, many cases of persecution of Christians, of the Rohingya Muslims, and indeed of other Muslims throughout the country. There have been Muslims who've been attacked who aren't Rohingyas, villages that have declared themselves no-go zones for Muslims. The country's most prominent monk, Sidagu Sayadaw, has said that Buddhists are the true inhabitants of the country, and that Muslims, and by implication Christians as well, are guests, and he said the guests must obey the hosts. Christians in particular are among the ethnic minorities. The Kachin, the Chin, the Karen and the Karenni have been particularly targeted for their Christian faith. Churches destroyed, crosses in Chin state destroyed, sometimes Buddhist pagodas forcibly constructed in the place of crosses. People, hundreds of thousands of people displaced. I met Christians in Kalemio a few years ago who were students, and they just tried to build a very small prayer room in their village. Not a church, not a big construct, just a place for them to meet and pray. And local villagers, stirred up by Buddhist nationalists, protested and stoned them multiple times, and they were forbidden to build their prayer room. These women, their husbands were in prison a few years ago, they're ethnic Kachin, and they told me that the torture that their husbands endured in prison included being forced to kneel for long periods of time on very sharp stones with their arms outstretched as if on a cross. Physically a painful position to be in, but also a deliberate mockery of their Christian faith. This woman told me she heard the Burma army attacking her village, and she hid under a bed and heard the bullets fly over her, and heard a Burma army soldier say to his men, "If you see a Kachin, just kill them." This is a Muslim madrasa that was burnt down. I visited it a few days after the attack. And then you've heard already about the Rohingya, and because of time I won't go into detail, but I just share these images. This was a Rohingya imam in the refugee camps in Bangladesh who I met, and I asked him if he was targeted for his faith, and he said yes. When the Burma army attacked our village, the first thing they did was to come to the mosque. Before they burnt down the mosque, they took the Quran, and in his words, they played football with it. And I thought to myself, if somebody did that with the Bible, how would we feel? And these are just some final images of the Rohingya. This was a 16-year-old girl who told me that 300 people in her village, including her father, several of her siblings, had been murdered by the Burma army. She herself had been shot multiple times as she was attacked by the military. And all of these people are facing a common two challenges. One from the Burma army, which, and that's been going on for decades, but another from this new rise of militant Buddhist nationalism. And the two are intertwined, but sometimes function separately. I'm going to skip just to some final closing images before I conclude. I want to leave you with some thoughts on what can we do in the face of these challenges. Well, one example is this image of Burma's Cardinal Bo. On Holy Thursday in Holy Week, the famous washing of the feet, and he deliberately last year washed the feet not just of Catholics, but of Muslims, of Buddhists, of Protestants, of Hindus, in a very deliberate message. We've taken him and Buddhist monks who try to counter intolerance and Muslims to the United Nations. We've taken people from Burma to Indonesia to have dialogue and exchange with faith communities there with similar experiences. This is a monk with the daughter of the former president of Indonesia. These are Buddhist monks holding the bags of the Ahmadiyya community with the Ahmadiyya's message, love for all, hatred for none. These are Burmese and Indonesians together, standing in solidarity and protest for religious freedom. And then this is an image, and I'm going to close very shortly. This is an image that I really love. On that visit to Indonesia, the Buddhist monk from Burma presented the Indonesian Muslim cleric with a gift, and they hugged each other. And a few weeks later, I was giving a workshop in Burma, and I showed this image, and I said, this is what we should be aiming for, a society where we do this rather than kill each other or try to shut each other's places of worship down. And there was a Buddhist monk in that workshop, and he came up to me at the end, and he said, I love that image. He said, I want to do the same too, and he flung his arms around me. Cardinal Bo says this: freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief is perhaps the most precious and most basic freedom of all. Without the freedom to choose, practice, share, and change your beliefs, there is no freedom. He and Alyssa Waheed wrote an article together in which they said we must learn to separate race, religion, and politics. We must speak out for freedom of religion for all. And I leave you now, as I conclude, with some words from a very different situation. And I won't give you the background to this, but I worked for many years with Shahbaz Bhatti in Pakistan. Shahbaz Bhatti, the Minister for Minorities in the Pakistani government, who was assassinated for his attempts to repeal or reform the blasphemy laws. And he said these words not long before he was killed, and I leave them with you as a challenge for us all. He said, I live for religious freedom, and I'm ready to die for this cause. We have a commitment to bring a change in the lives of people. We will bring a change in the life of those living in darkness, a change in the lives of those who don't have a hope, and we will bring a smile on the faces of those living under severe harassment and victimization. This is the key objective of my life, to live for those who are voiceless, who are suffering, and to bring justice for those who are denied justice. These Taliban, he said, threaten me, but I want to share that I believe in Jesus Christ, who gave his own life for us. I know what is the meaning of the cross, and I am following the cross. I'm ready to die for a cause. I'm living for my community and my suffering people, and I will die to defend their rights. We may not be called to pay that ultimate price that Shahbaz Bhatti paid, but whatever our beliefs, whatever faith tradition we come from, or if we come from none, let us join together to take up that cause for which Shahbaz Bhatti gave his life, for religious freedom and for human dignity for everyone, everywhere. Thank you very much.
Now we'll hear from Siju on the situation in India and South Asia.
Sure. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, Ben, for that interesting overview from the region that you were covering. Distinguished members of the gathering, my name is Siju Thomas. I am from New Delhi, India, and I represent Alliance Defending Freedom, India. We are an alliance-building legal organization working in the areas of religious freedom and sanctity of life. I think when Ben was mentioning about the challenges of a post-lunch session, he failed to mention that when it is post-lunch and a jet lag combined, it's a very potent mix, and therefore it's difficult to capture the audience's attention. Anyways, I'll try and make it as less painful as possible. I'll begin with a story. I just returned from a trip from an Indian state known as Chhattisgarh, and I met someone in a very remote part of that state. He is a tribal person, and he accepted Jesus maybe a year and a half back. And as a result of that, the entire village ostracized him. All his family members ostracized him, including his wife ostracized him. The pressure was so real, the pressure was so huge. I imagine that the wife who had been there with that person for maybe almost like 40 years, even she felt the pressure to leave him because of his faith. So we can understand the daunting pressure that the community or the people of faith often feel. They cannot access water from the hand pump outside their home. They have to walk like some other believers in that area. They were telling me that they need to walk 4 to 5 kilometers, and they have been doing that for the last 2 to 3 years. Where they had to walk 4 to 5 kilometers to go to a river and get their water. So it affects people in various degrees and at various levels, and it is important to realize that South Asia as a region often sees this kind of ostracization, this kind of hostility that is often combined with government restrictions, combined with government policies or laws. Pew Forum, it's a US-based think tank. It categorizes all persecution into 2 neat columns, though I think there are overlapping aspects in all of them, and often one fuels the other or the other way around. So it says that government restrictions and social hostilities are 2 categories in which Christians often face persecution. The issue that I spoke about is pretty common in Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the area that I will attempt to cover during my presentation. Pew Forum data again recounts in its research that as governments increase their restriction of religious communities, social hostilities also increase on the side. Government responses and actions to restrict religious freedom often fuels hostility. The extremists assume that they are immune from actions of the government, or law enforcement agencies, or in a way that what they are perpetuating what even the government would want them to do or what government would have them do. And when the government returns or responds to their actions in silence, it further brings about a culture of impunity. And this is what we see across the region. It may be in the form of blasphemy laws or in the form of anti-conversion laws in India, but often both of them work together. The government comes out with its own set of laws and policies, and because of that, the people think that this is a group that is being targeted because of their faith or whatever their belief is, and they think that it is okay to take the law into their own hands, and then they bring about violence, and the government is silent in that, and there is no action. So this keeps going on in the region that I'm trying to cover, and there is often no accountability for such action. We have heard enough about the blasphemy laws in Pakistan, but just a little bit of history to it. When such laws are brought about, generally the pattern in them would be that the government would always want to represent that they are being done for the benefit of the people, or they are being brought about to maintain religious harmony in society. You won't believe even the blasphemy laws have a history like that. They were promulgated in colonial, undivided India, and because of having different ethnicities and different religious groups in the country, the British deemed it fit that there should be a law to this effect that no one should insult the religion of the other. It so happened that after independence, Pakistan felt that specific provisions for the protection of Islam or the Prophet needed to be added on to the law, and that's how we see the blasphemy law in the form and nature that it is now. In fact, India, which has the anti-conversion law, or the freedom of religion law as it is called, also is for such a purpose. They say that nobody should be forced to convert their religion or change their religion, and therefore we are bringing out a law which will ensure that everybody has an equal field. Now, how do they go about that? They come up with certain terms in the law which are not properly defined. They use certain words like force, fraud, allurement, inducement, divine displeasure, and they say that, if any of your actions fall within these definitions are as vague, as open-ended as possible. And so any of your actions, if they fall within these areas, that would mean that you are trying to forcefully convert another person. So for example, if I am preaching on a Sunday and I'm saying that if you don't believe in Jesus, or if you don't believe in God, you'll not receive heaven, and there's a good possibility that you'll go to hell, I can easily be booked for a threat of divine displeasure. And I think almost everyone who heard me right now has been threatened that. So you understand how the law is operating. Or we have another case, an actual case, where a person prayed for a sick person, and he said that if you pray to Jesus, you'll be healed. And incidentally, after a few days, that person passed away, and that person was later booked under this law. So you understand how absurd this law is, and the government, how it justifies bringing about this law. But the effect of it is that people of faith find it difficult to practice their faith. On ground, it becomes difficult to be a believer, observe your faith. And that is, and the hostility that comes about from such law also goes around with this. We have this narrative in India. Anybody who is running a church or anybody who is engaged in Christian activity, they would say that you are trying to forcefully or forcibly convert people. You don't have to do anything specifically. It's the narrative that is there. It's the rhetoric that they use, that any activity that you would do would be considered as trying to forcefully convert. There haven't been many convictions under this law. There haven't been many people being actually charged and taken the whole taken through the whole process where they are actually convicted. But still, it gives an armor in the hands of the people to say that there is a law like this, and if you are praying together, or if you are in a minority religion, and if you are in your area, you are, especially with Christianity, if you are observing your religion, you are forcefully trying to convert. They would often ask, why is there a need to have a church in a place like this? We don't have many Christians in this place. This place is majoritarian Hindu in majority. Why do you even have a church in this place? The fact that you have established a church here implies that you're trying to bring in those people in the community also into this church, and therefore you are trying to forcefully convert people. So you see, in many ways, you could be easily covered under this law or under the definitions, open-ended definitions of this law. We have heard from the speakers from Nepal how the new constitution came about there. I'm just trying to show how law again preceded there in Nepal and how hostility followed and how it went up on a rise. In 2015, Nepal adopted the new constitution, and when the interim constitution was still being brought about, ADF had sent its delegation to Nepal to recommend to the Constituent Assembly some of the provisions which could be brought in to ensure that religious freedom is maintained in Nepal. And initially, when the interim constitution was out, Nepal had declared itself to be a secular country where every person would have equal protection under the law and there would be freedom of conscience. But eventually, when the constitution came out, it says that there is special protection to Sanatan Dharma, the eternal religion. And by doing so, they have created a special place for Hinduism within the constitution itself. I'm not going through the specific provisions of the articles of the constitution, but I'm just reading out one provision here which says that no person shall convert a person from one religion to another, or any act or any conduct that may jeopardize others' religion, and such act shall be punishable by law. Now, after the constitution was brought about, the new constitution was brought about, there were some corresponding changes that they brought about in the penal code, and immediately thereafter, I think in the beginning of 2018, we see a surge in the violence that happens against Christians for very mundane, for very common things that they would do. You would have Christians being booked in Nepal. So again, we see a pattern where there is a law or there is a sort of government stamp being given to having to treat minorities in a certain way or religious minorities in a certain way, and that being followed by hostility from the general community. In Sri Lanka, they use a government circular as an excuse to deny construction of mosques or Christian churches. Again, our partner organization last year reported that there were around 86 incidents of violence in Sri Lanka. We are all well aware of what has recently happened on Easter Sunday. It was appalling that people who would go to Sunday in piety and to observe that sacred day would have been denied of their life in Sri Lanka. So the problem is very real, and the government is often not helping, and it is in many cases fueling, or by its own actions, by its own policies and law, fueling such hostility often in many cases. In 2018, we identified close to 300 cases in India where people were targeted for their faith, people were left dead, churches were burnt, people were physically assaulted. And this year doesn't seem to be going any better. Within the span of maybe 5 months now, only we are seeing some of the states which were not recording so many incidents of violence already showing a spike in the incidents of violence, and especially after the elections and the majority with which the new government has come in, a lot of the groups believe that it is a recognition of what they had been doing over the last few years, and they hope to continue it, or they hope to maybe increase their efforts to ensure that their agenda comes about. The Pew data research, which I was dealing with just a little back, I am running short on time, so I'll like to run through it very fast. It says that, just to affirm what I was saying, that there is a growing share of incidents of government restrictions or social hostilities, and which involves political parties and social groups who espouse nationalist positions. About 1 in 10 countries, 11%, had government actors that use national rhetoric against members of a particular religious group. And 16% of countries in their report had organized social groups that used nationalist rhetoric against religious minorities in the country. So it can be easily identified. There is a narrative that is being built, often a nationalist narrative or a majoritarian narrative, to say that, to justify violence. We were very fortunate to have a very decisive victory from the Delhi High Court earlier this year. And that is where also, when I go through that example, that is where also my solution for probably, this could be something that we could discuss over the course of the day today and tomorrow. I think we need to challenge that narrative first, that the rhetoric needs to be challenged. We are advocating for, or the advocacy efforts for reaching out to governments is happening on the side. When we are trying to reach to the victims and provide support to them, as CSW well does, we are trying to reach out to them in all ways. But I think there is this narrative also, the rhetoric also, that needs to be combated. And we were able to get that when we engaged the courts for that in India. There was this case of Dr. Christo Philip that came before the Delhi High Court. He is an American doctor of Indian origin who was practicing medicine in India. And he had been deported by the Ministry of Home Affairs on the allegation that he was involved in missionary activity. He was the holder of something known as an Overseas Citizen of India card. And the MHA used that to justify that, when you are holding an OCI card, you cannot be involved in missionary activities. The court, which we represented Mr. Christo, Dr. Christo, before the court, and the court was quick to find out, quick to say, I'm just going to the observations of the court straight away. Permit me to read this. All persons in this country have a right to practice their faith in the manner they consider fit, so long as it does not offend any other person. If the petitioner's faith motivates the petitioner to volunteer for medical services at a hospital, there is no law, certainly no law in this land, that proscribes him from doing so. And towards the end, it concluded by saying the petitioner has a right to practice his faith, and his rendering medical service, even if it is for furtherance of his religion, cannot be denied. The respondents have produced no law that proscribes missionary activities, and the impugned orders which proceed on the assumption that such activities are against the law of the land are fundamentally flawed. I think it's very important for us to keep challenging the narrative, keep challenging the argument that the other side is bringing, that the rhetoric needs to be challenged, the base on which it is standing needs to be challenged. If I go back to the example with which I started, I asked that individual, in the face of such daunting hostility and opposition, where even your family members and your own wife left you, why are you still following Jesus? And he says that there was a certain time in my life that I was very sick, very unwell. There was no one to look after me. My village and my community was not there to take care of me. The members who were trying to ostracize me, they were not there to take care of me. When I went to Jesus, he was able to heal me. And I know that even till I die, and if I die ostracized, that is fine. But even if I die, I'll stay strong in my faith. I think there is a boldness in often victims of persecution which we don't discuss in often conferences like these, which we think needs to be highlighted. They are victims of persecution, but they have tremendous boldness within them to stand for their faith. That is why they are not recanting their faith. They are not going back to whatever the people are asking them or pressurizing them to do so. So I think we need to borrow some of their boldness in our initiatives, in our efforts, we need to have the same conviction that some of the victims of persecution in their own areas show. Thank you for your patient listening. May God bless you all.
Thank you, Sinju. And now we'll hear from James on the situation in the Middle East.
Thank you. Hi, my name is James Chen. I have two sons at home. They're 9 and 6, and they're kind of at that age where they're starting to tell jokes, and sometimes these jokes just don't kind of make sense. Other times, you get some good ones though. And I figured there's one that came to my mind as we're going through this. So joke goes, why was the bicycle not able to run? Why was the bicycle not able to run? Because it was too tired. Get it? Too tired? Anyway, that'd be a nice pick me up while going through this afternoon session. My name's James Chen. I'm with the Institute for Global Engagement. We're an NGO based in the DC area. We work on catalyzing freedom of faith. We're a faith-based organization. We're all Christians, but similar to CSW, we work for the freedom of religion and belief and freedom of conscience for people of all faiths and none. Today I'm going to be talking about persecution against Christian communities, especially in the Middle East. As the birthplace of Christianity, the Christian communities in the Middle East, they trace their roots back hundreds of years, and obviously back to the time of Jesus. And that would precede the Arab conquests that ultimately propelled Islam into the region's dominant religious force. Many of the indigenous Christians there to this day speak some form of Aramaic. Aramaic is a language that Jesus spoke. In the modern era, the Middle East has been a region where the persecution of Christians has been the most intense. A century ago, Christians made up about 20% of the region's population. That's 1 century ago. Now it is less than 4%. That drastic decline was primarily due to deaths from attacks from both state and non-state actors, expulsion from these countries, or fleeing the region to find safety elsewhere. In preparation for this presentation, I also came upon a really great report that I would commend to you. And it's from the Bishop of Truro's independent review for the Foreign Secretary of the Foreign Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom. And this report focused specifically on persecuted Christians. And it was just released during Easter of this year. And let me just read to you one of the main conclusions, focusing on the Middle East and North Africa region. It says, during the past 2 decades, religious freedom in the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa, has taken a turn for the worse. Sectarianism is the main source of most conflicts and remains a powerful political, social, and cultural force throughout MENA. As a result, the MENA ethnic and religious minority groups, especially Christians, face a high level of persecution by the state, by religious extremist armed groups, and in many places by societies and communities. In countries such as Algeria, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, the situation of Christians and other minorities has reached an alarming stage. In Saudi Arabia, there are strict limitations on all forms of expression of Christianity, including public acts of worship. There have been regular crackdowns on private Christian services. The Arab-Israeli conflict has caused a majority of Palestinian Christians to leave their homeland. The population of Palestinian Christians has dropped from 15% to 2%. The 2011 uprisings and the fall of old dictatorships gave ground to religious extremism that has increased greatly the pressures upon and persecutions of Christians in Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Libya. Religious persecution and discrimination political failures, the rise of Muslim extremists, and the lack of legally protected freedom of religion and belief have all contributed in shaping the status of Christians in the MENA region. Now, I'd like to maybe narrow down to the case of Iraq. This is a country that my organization has worked in and I've had some personal experience on. With Iraq, pre-2003, before the US invasion, the population of Christians was approximately 1.4 million. Now, there's estimated to be less than 150,000 remaining there. After the US invasion and toppling of the Saddam Hussein regime, the chaos and the power vacuum gave rise to Islamic extremist groups that regularly launched brutal attacks on Christians and churches. So I'm not talking about ISIS here, I'm talking about pre-ISIS, but just to build up to that, you might have been familiar with many reports of churches in Baghdad being attacked. So these attacks were ongoing. But obviously one extremist group in particular eventually became what we know now as ISIS and embarked on a campaign of killing and enslaving religious and ethnic minorities, including Christians, that drew the worldwide attention. My organization, Institute for Global Engagement, in response to this, we felt called to partner with local actors, local organizations, NGOs, as well as governments in the region to see what we could do to help. And that resulted in an effort that we called the Cradle Fund. And the Cradle Fund basically sought a strategy to rescue, restore, and return. Rescue, bring immediate relief and humanitarian supplies. Restore, bring educational opportunities and trauma healing counseling. And return, ultimately hoping to return those that have been internally displaced or who have fled their homes to be able to return to their homelands. And so the area that we focused in was basically the area what we call the Nineveh Plains. And this map up here shows the area that's marked with a cross. That's the rough area of the Nineveh Plains region. And for those that have read their Bibles, it's the Nineveh that's mentioned in the book of Jonah. So it's in northern Iraq, and it's also borders the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And basically, when ISIS rose in that region, they basically rolled into the Nineveh Plains. There were a number of Christian villages as well as villages that were inhabited by Yazidis, the Yazidi people, Shabak people. The Kurdish Peshmerga, the army, had initially told them that they would be defending them, but basically the night before the ISIS forces rolled in, the Kurdish Peshmerga felt that it wasn't worth it, and so they withdrew. And basically that led to a mass fleeing of the inhabitants of these villages, or for those that did not flee, they ended up being captured and enslaved or killed. The way IG works in these regions is we basically try to engage both from the top down and the bottom up, government actors, as well as religious community, civil society. So this is just, I just want to show you some pictures of some of the engagement that we've been doing. Here's a picture of a meeting with the foreign minister of the Kurdistan regional government. And we want to make sure that in any relief efforts that we're trying to bring to fore, that we're doing it in cooperation, in partnership with whoever's in charge, whatever the majority group is. And so at that time, the Nineveh Plains, the Kurdistan regional government was basically in charge over that region. Oh, sorry. And then we also wanted to meet with groups that were doing good things on the ground, good work. And so this is this is a group of the Dominican sisters in the Nineveh Plains region. They were providing educational opportunities for children of displaced persons. And we met with many groups like this, trying to see how we could come alongside and help them. And we also tried to understand the security situation in the region. This particular fellow is a member of the forces that are aligned with the Assyrian Democratic Movement. That's one of the the Assyrian Christian parties that works with the Kurdish Peshmerga in their efforts. And nowadays, most recently, we have a program called the Center for Women, Faith and Leadership Fellowship Program. And we have an Assyrian Christian and a Yazidi woman and a Dominican sister. And we provide, and they're all working in the area of trauma, care, and counseling to their particular populations. And so working through these efforts, we're hopefully trying to bring about some kind of help that the international community can bring to the fore. Now, although the Christian homeland in the Nineveh Plains has been liberated from ISIS, Christians still face a significant level of hostility and threats from all the surrounding populations, the Sunni Arabs, Shiite militias, Kurds, and Shabaks, which are another minority. Many Christians have not returned to their homes on the Nineveh Plains because of a lack of infrastructure and security. To date, a majority of those that were displaced and fled their homes have chosen to remain in whether it's the IDP camps or in their current circumstances, or they've emigrated abroad to start a new life. Tentative efforts have been made to form militias for self-defense of these communities. 5 separate Christian militia groups are currently operating in northern Iraq, each with different alignments vis-a-vis the Kurdistan regional government or the government in Baghdad. But still, they're very sparsely armed, and they very much still depend on larger powers in the region. And the pessimistic side will look at the Christians in this northern Iraq, perhaps going the way of the Jews there. In the past, there was actually quite a vibrant population of Jewish people in Iraq, but due to over the past 100 years, they're pretty much non-existent now, just due to hostility from the surrounding community. So we pray and we hope that that same thing will not happen to Christians or the other ethnic and religious minorities in Iraq. And so I would just like to conclude with a few tips and maybe recommendations that my organization came across as we talked to and listened to partners on the ground. First is that relief and development work must serve all groups, not just Christians or not just Yazidis, but also the surrounding Muslims as well. The narrative is crucial. Relief and development work must be done in a way that builds an inclusive Iraqi citizenship while embodying reconciliation. Minorities are a vital and contributing part of Iraq, and the media can play a key role in reinforcing this fact. Second, there needs to be a unified military and police command. One of the things that the refugees told us most was that they don't feel safe if they return. So there needs to be some kind of viable security force in the region. Third, obviously, reconstruction of homes is one of the top priorities. People need roofs over their heads, and they need furniture. Fourth, trauma care is paramount, especially for women and children. It's imperative to have whole women who are building whole families that can build whole societies. Fifth, job creation is critical, not only to provide dignity and a livelihood for those returning, but to prevent people from joining whatever the next ISIS may be. And people want a hand up, not a hand down. And finally, unexploded ordnance is still quite prevalent in those villages there. They have booby-trapped homes and IEDs that are still in place, left behind by ISIS. And so there needs to be a systematic effort to remove the unexploded ordnance, and that just improves the security situation there. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, James. And next up, we will hear from Dr. Ajibuye, who will be discussing the situation of religious freedom in Africa.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. I wanted to be sure you're awake. My name is Shayo Ajiboye. I am the president of Mission Africa International, and I am also the president of RCCG, Redeemed Christian Church of God Seminary in Greenville, Texas. I want to tell you about what is happening in Africa, and I will start by telling you the good part, and then we'll go to the not so good part. I must acknowledge that I'm here representing Stephen Enada, whose name you saw in the book. Stephen is who we call the Dean of the Nigerian Diplomacy Advocacy in Washington, D.C. An amazing young man who is totally committed to religious freedom. Before I go on, I must state my appreciation to Bob Fu and what he has been doing in being a pacemaker for the rest of us. Thank you very much. So I'll tell you about hope. March 2017, I went to a village where virtually all the male in the village were wiped out by Islamic militants. On the spot where they were killed, we decided to build a school. And these are the children of Hope International School. There is hope in the midst of Islamic militancy. Our children receive love, care, and a world-class education. We want to create an antithesis for pain. We want to create a living hope. Somebody a minute ago was talking about the passionate desire for Jesus that is among the persecuted. I am a witness. You most probably have heard about Boko Haram and the devastation that they represent, our Fulani herdsmen, the most dangerous militant organization in the world today, resident in my country. But in the place where Fulani herdsmen operate, between March this year and now, we were able to raise 5,000 women who committed themselves to praying. And they meet in small groups right in the home of Boko Haram to pray. See, there is hope. And that is the last thing I want to say about this section is that, we neglect what oftentimes as advocates, we forget what our Lord taught us, and we don't pay attention to it. And I want to challenge us to pick it up again. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Let us pray. And right now I pray for all my friends and children and women in difficult places all over the world. I ask, oh God, in the name of the Lord Jesus, that your hand will reach out to them and you will bless them this afternoon. Amen. All my children at Hope are orphans, and all of them have experienced Islamic violence. What we do, however, is infinitesimal, a drop in a violent ocean of persecution in Africa. According to the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, 4 African states are on the Tier 1 states where you have systematic, ongoing, egregious violation of religious freedom. And those states are Eritrea, Sudan, Central African Republic, and my country, Nigeria. According to Open Doors, USA, their watch list for 2019, 15 nations are places where people are experiencing intense, extreme persecutions in Africa. And those nations are Somalia, Libya, Sudan, Eritrea, Nigeria, my country again, Maldives, Egypt, Central African Republic, Algeria, Mali, Mauritania, Ethiopia, Morocco, and Kenya. Out of a population of 1.26 billion in Africa, at least 659 million are experiencing persecution. That's about half of the whole continent. Let me tell you a little bit about Nigeria. About 2 million people have been chased away from their homes this year alone by Islamists. In politically correct communities, people don't want to talk about this. People don't want to say Islamists are doing this. But this is what I live with. This is the phone call I received in the middle of the night. Even this week, women and children crying as the Islamists use AK-47 to chase them out of their communities. 1 million children and women displaced by extremists just in a portion of my country in the Northeast. You can see on top here, 3 weeks ago, I was in the place called Adamawa and Gombe. These are, to the north of it, people, the government of Nigeria says, we have conquered Boko Haram. It's a lie. Churches have been devastated. Not only do they burn down the churches, when they finish burning it down, they bring in bulldozer and remove the foundation so that you cannot see it again, that there is a church there. So, there's this lie that northern Nigeria is Muslim. It's a lie. I bought the lie myself until I went to northern Nigeria, and I found out that the majority of the people in northern Nigeria are Christians. Well, I don't know how I'm going to do this. 450 verified attack in 2018, 3,397 deaths verified. The female children, the most at risk because they will sell them into slavery as sexual slaves. Tens of thousands, voiceless ones, kidnapped, enslaved, displaced. According to the Inspector General of Police in 2019, 1,071 people have been killed, 685 kidnapped in 2019. And it's not just in Nigeria. It's in Mali, it's in Burkina Faso, it's in Niger. And you see the map over there. That's Mali, that's Burkina Faso, that's Niger. Every spot you see there is a spot of action by Islamists. The Lake Chad Basin is a no-go area now. So in the country of Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, all the areas surrounding Lake Chad have been taken over by Boko Haram and cleared out in an attempt to start an emirate. You can see the map over there. Yesterday, May 28th, or day before yesterday, one of the children associated with the lady who leads our organization in Adamawa that I pointed out to you, went out with the little sheep they have and was accosted by Fulani militants. And he was told to say the Shahada. Of course, he's a Christian boy, he doesn't know Shahada. They wounded him. I obscure the place where they wounded him. But you can see for yourself that it's in the most dangerous place for a boy. They wounded him. This is Khadija. At that time, I would have shared with you a video about her because the video is there. Khadija is a Fulani girl. Her own parents took her out to execute her because she became a Christian. Our own mother and father did that. So what do we need to do urgently? We need structured, high-level engagement and pressure on the governments of the region. We need that freedom of religion must exist within their borders. We must demand freedom of religion, of worship for all. In this instance, I want to quickly mention the persecution of the Shiites in Nigeria. That persecution must stop. It's wrong. We need to remove impunity. The global community need to find a way to stop impunity of the state and non-state perpetrators of violence. We need a global action plan for religious freedom in Africa. We need a voice for the voiceless, for the persecuted. In this instance, shortwave radio helps. We need humanitarian services. Northeast Nigeria is now reputed to be the poorest place on the face of the earth. If you are capable of doing something, please do it for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajibuye. Next up, we will hear from Professor Intravigne, editor of Bitter Winter magazine, on the situation of religious freedom in China.
So thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very grateful to Pastor Bob Fu and his team and the other co-organizer. I operate, it works? Yes. I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm basically an academic, a professor of sociology of religion, not a politician. But in 2018, with some colleagues, I started a daily magazine in 8 languages called Bitter Winter, out of the need of doing something about the horrific situation of religious liberty in China. We tell stories about President Xi Jinping's China, but the problems with religious liberty didn't start with Xi Jinping. When he got to power in 1949, Chairman Mao was fully committed to eradicating religion. However, in the beginning, the crackdown was slow, because he believed eliminating religion with violence was bad international PR, and also as a Marxist, he was persuaded religion will disappear spontaneously once communism was implemented in China. So what Mao did was to try to control religion. He expelled the foreign missionaries, and he decided that if you want to be a member of a religion at all in China, which was not encouraged and was forbidden for members of the party, you should belong to one of 5 party-controlled organizations, one for Buddhist, one for Muslim, one for Taoist, one for Christian Protestants called the Three Self Church, and one for Catholic called the Patriotic Church, which at that time was promptly excommunicated by the Vatican. That didn't work. And we now know that Mao didn't only tolerate, but instigated the Cultural Revolution in '66, and one of the aims was to completely eliminate religion. All churches were closed, including the places of worship, church, mosques, etc., including those of the state-controlled religions, and by a conservative estimated between 66 and 76 half a million believers were killed. Mao died in 76. Deng Xiaoping went to the power, and he realized the Cultural Revolution had been a disaster for China, including economically. He also realized that, contrary to communist expectations, religion was still there. In 1982, Deng Xiaoping published the famous document number 19, where he concluded that religion will probably stay in China still for 100 years or more, and decided to grant some limited emphasis on limited tolerance to religion. Then, however, as was mentioned before, in 1989, Tiananmen happened. We have a movie about Tiananmen and religion, but will not have time to show it. Unfortunately, if somebody is interested, I can send the movie to them. Tiananmen alone will not have had the devastating consequences for religious liberty it had, but what had very bad consequences for religion was the combination of Tiananmen and the events of the same year, 1989, in Eastern Europe. Because the combination persuaded the Communist Party that if too much latitude was left to religion, China will go the way of Poland or Hungary or the Baltic states, and the CCP will lose power. So after Tiananmen, things went much worse. On one hand, Christian house churches were more successful than before because people were disappointed with the CCP politics, but on the other hand, they were more persecuted. In 1995, the list of banned religious movements called Seijiao was revived, that already exists in Imperial and Republican China, and in 1999, the regime clashed with Falun Gong, starting a severe persecution of this movement. Then 9/11 happened, which was an ideal pretext for the CCP to crack down more than before on Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in East Turkestan or Xinjiang, because for several years the CCP was able to sell to the West the lie that most Uyghurs were supporting terrorism, which was not true, but was widely believed. And of course, that was accompanied by a general crackdown on separatism, which also made the situation worse in Tibet. No, it's the other way around. So Xi Jinping became CCP secretary in 2012 and president of China in 2013. As you see, international media are often comparing Xi Jinping to Chairman Mao. Well, not economically. He maintains a different economy from Chairman Mao, but there is something in common in promoting a personality cult, mostly of himself and occasionally of Mao, and in cracking down on religion, as it has been said by our chairperson in the worst way since the Cultural Revolution. Really, with Xi Jinping, all religions suffer. More than others, the religions classified or designated as Seijiao, including Falun Gong and other groups such as the Church of Almighty God. I was invited to China to 2 seminars in 2017. I will probably not be invited again, but in 2017 I was still invited to seminars criticizing Church of Almighty God, and the authorities told us this new religious movement has 4 million members, which is probably not true. They are probably less, but still the regime is very much scared by their numbers. It is also true that the CCP launched a campaign of fake news to justify the persecution. I already mentioned efforts to persuade that most Uyghurs support terrorism. Actually, the CCP could prove only a few hundred Uyghurs in Xinjiang had some contacts with international terrorist organizations. I say few hundreds. They claimed Falun Gong was responsible of a number of acts of violence they never committed, and particularly in 2014, they claimed Church of Almighty God was responsible of a murder of a girl in a McDonald's in Zhaojuan, Shandong. And that's a case I have studied. I've written 2 or 3 articles. Courtesy of the CCP, I have had access when I went to China to the proceedings, to the transcript of the trial, and it's very clear these people who really committed the crime were members of another different, smaller, new religious movement and not of the large Church of Almighty God. But really, the crackdown under Xi Jinping involves all religions, including the 5 authorized religions. We report on Bitter Winter almost every day that even churches of the Three Self Church or authorized temples and mosques are demolished or destroyed for administrative reasons. One main reason is that it's forbidden to let minors of 18 enter places of worship, and if you do this, the place of worship can be demolished. No. For Uyghurs, there are the famous transformation through education camps, and now similar camps have been built in Tibet for Tibetan Buddhists as well. The CCP for many years denied they existed at all. Perhaps we at Bitter Winter did a small contribution to change things by posting the first videos from inside the camps. And finally, the CCP now admits the camp exists, but say they are vocational schools. Now they are not schools. Our videos clearly show they are jails. They are no schools. The situation is also worsening in Tibet. Under Xi Jinping, crackdown continues on Tibetan religion, culture, and even language. New limitations have been created to prevent even monasteries to teach privately during the school recess time the Tibetan language to children. The policy of Xi Jinping was institutionalized with the new regulation of 2017, which came into force on February 1, 2018. And according to most scholars, to the majority of scholars, the main aim of the new regulation is to crack down on house churches. That's what my colleague, the well-known scholar Yang Fenggang, called the gray market of religion in China. The red market is the CCP-controlled religion, the black market are the Sejao. In the middle, there is the gray market, it's mostly Christian and mostly including house churches. And with the new regulation, Xi Jinping is trying to tell the house churches, either you join the red market, the three self, or you will be treated like the black market and seriously persecuted unless you are very small, very local, and almost invisible. But there is a very visible dimension of Xi Jinping policy, and it's the destruction and demolition of churches, temples, even a synagogue in Kaifeng, and Taoist places of worship and of statues. I believe in Taiwan, the media quote Bitter Winter mostly for our videos and pictures of demolitions of Buddhist statues. And last week, Mr. Wood, Taiwan's foreign minister, retweeted Bitter Winter on destruction of Buddhist statues in Taiwan.
Professor, it looks like I received word that we have the Vice President here who's going to be speaking in a few minutes. So
I have just two points to make. Number one is dealing with the Catholic Church because of its international dimension. Rather than simply cracking down on the Catholic Church, the way to go for the regime was a deal with the Vatican, which should lead to the merger of the underground church, the one was loyal to the Vatican, with the patriotic church. But how this is interpreted is different in Rome and in Beijing, and dissident priests are still persecuted. In conclusion, you see I'm concluding, particularly the Uyghur issue is a new public relation disaster for Xi Jinping, calling the attention of the world on the very bad record on human rights of China. And what you see here, including Bob Fu in this picture, is one of the effects of Xi Jinping's policy, is groups who have very different theologies coming together and cooperating in telling the world that there is no religious liberty in China. That may make us optimistic, but on the other hand, we may be pessimistic, because it seems that cracking down on religion for Xi Jinping is more important than having a better image around the world. Thank you.
thank you. So as mentioned, the Vice President is here. Reverend Lim, who was supposed to be our last panelist, is going to be presenting in a little bit around 5:30. So this concludes our panel on Christian persecution. Thank you for your attention, and thank you on behalf of my organization, the Family of the Research Council. I think all of these presentations are very important issues in different ways, and so thank you again for listening.
So let's have a very quick break, right? 我们是休息几分钟吗？ Yeah.
在这个地方宣布等一下的时间。
I'll make the announcement about the time that we need to keep now.
我们必须要在4点10分之前回到我们的座位。
So if you look at the clock over there, we need to return to our seats 4:10, 20 minutes later, sharp.
因为等一下有一个重要的贵宾要跟我们一起讨论 一起参与讨论下一个 session。
Yeah, because the moderator has already pointed out that the vice president will be joining the full session, the next session with us. So we need to be here.
好，那我们开始我们的休息时间，谢
Yeah, so
谢。
please take your break.